Hi there, and welcome to today's episode where we talk with Steven Rosen, who is a writer, podcaster, entrepreneur, and he's helping people overcome trauma and discover their potential. But this conversation is pure, raw honesty. Steven takes us on his journey with the background that he had, the rough growing up he had, the conditioning, and then the coping mechanisms that he learned from there, and the limiting beliefs he developed that ran the trajectory of his early life until when he was 24, had a first moment of realization, changing his direction, stepping up, building obviously publicly very successful life, and yet feeling that he doesn't know himself and he's not really sure about his journey, and then having another aha moment and embarking on even bigger journey of learning and discovering and peeling those layers of the onion to figure out who we are, what is our truth, and how to live the best authentic life. So come and join us in this raw and beautiful and challenging and inspiring conversation that we had with Steven.
Before we start the conversation, we'd love it if you would just hit the subscribe button, because when you do that, it helps us to have a further reach and to reach more people so that they can benefit from these beautiful conversations that we have. But now, let's get on with the conversation.
Hi, Steven. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hey, Lenka. Yes, I'm really well today. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me onto the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Same here. So excited to see where this conversation today is going to take us. So to give us, myself and Natalie and our listeners a little bit of a context to why are you here? What are we going to talk about? Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what do you do, what gets you up from the bed excited for the day ahead every morning?
Okay, thanks. Well, my name's Steven Rosen, and at the moment I'm a podcaster myself. I've got a podcast. I'm an author, so I've published a book. I'm an entrepreneur. I've built businesses, successful businesses. And also I'm in long-term recovery from addiction. That's approaching 38 years. So, you know, that's kind of the background. I mean, my history is growing up in the East End of London, in quite challenging family, really. My parents Republicans, and you know, it was an inspiring and interesting era, really. But I grew up in Shoreditch in London, and fairly soon, a couple of years after, we moved into a pub. My mum left, so she just disappeared. And, you know, I was just like, my dad was busy with all the stuff that running a pub takes, and all the characters in there. You get like villains in there, you get the flying squad and all that kind of stuff, you know, going back to the late 60s, early 70s. So a lot of, large characters, a lot of, you know, quite impressive sort of characters to a young boy. And, so, you know, that's where my story really started. And I won't go into the whole story now, but, you know, I kind of just didn't find what I needed within my family. My mum had left, you know, there was no nurturing. So I went out and created what was missing, basically. And that was the trajectory of my life, going through, you know, early childhood, leaving school early, addiction, and then, you know, getting into organised crime. And, you know, in my early 20s, I was running drugs with Lebanese militia. I was fighting the Lebanese civil war at the time. So I was, you know, just created whatever I thought I needed to fit in. And that was what I thought I needed. And unfortunately, I managed to, you know, I think it was my spirit was dying. You know, in my early 20s, I certainly had capabilities to carry on doing what I was doing, but yeah, something inside me was dying, and I managed to get a window of opportunity where I got clean and then changed direction. Started building, some honesty and integrity in my life, and I had a young family. So I started creating, security, all the stuff that was missing from my own childhood. Really. My childhood would, after we left the pub, we got evicted from places and had no electricity, no gas, no heat, So, when I got clean, I started building this security and just really went out with a bucket and a window cleaning squeegee and knocked on doors, and then built up this business of employing 100 people plus, and had a successful company in the city of London. And I'll finish this little synopsis, and then at the pinnacle of my success, really, if someone was looking from the outside, my life, I had wealth, I had, a 26-year relationship, I had a family, I had a beautiful house overlooking the coast, and I didn't really know where I was. And really, my story here of how I'm sitting on this podcast and doing the things that I've done is I went on a journey to really find out who I was, because, I was familiar with all the roles that I played in life, and I played them really well. I played them so well that I didn't know I was playing a role. But eventually, this question for me, who am I? Who would I be without all of these, without being this father, without being this employer, this husband, without all of these masks that I'd adapted, and lived in. So that was the beginning of a real deep change. So what gets me up in the morning, just to jump to that, to complete that part of the question, is, I'm inspired by life, and I'm inspired by sharing my experience, by creating new things, and really living to my potential. Because what I found was, in all of that stuff, I've got no complaints about any of it. I was healing, I was on a healing journey, and certainly healing from the outside, inwards. But what really kind of motivates me is that, I really want to live to my potential and understand who I am. I've reclaimed my authenticity, and I carry on doing that. That's ongoing work. Learning to feel, learning to go back and get all the parts that are left behind that really, I didn't know how to be with. And so I'm inspired by just really stepping into life, and I want to share this experience, and I want to share my insight with other people that actually, there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of depth and quality of life, more than the external valuation of ourselves, than what we got or what we do, or who we do, whether we're a parent. All that stuff's great, don't get me wrong, but, I found that, I was constantly, building my life and my reality around external validation of who I thought I needed to be. And when I got those pieces in place and, I could really polish them up, I thought that was it, life is amazing. But I was just acting out, in healthy ways, I suppose, but not really being me. And I now believe that I came into this life to be me, to live my truth, to speak my truth, and to walk with integrity and honesty. And so when I wake up in the morning, I surrender, and then I invite all of that stuff in. And most days it's good, some days it's tough. Life's a struggle, keeps coming, doesn't stop coming. And I accept today that is the nature of life, and I have a part in all of that. Even if I can't control external events, even if I can't, I'm powerless over that stuff, I have a conscious choice over how I react to it and how I process it. And that's the stuff that I learned and am learning, and that's the stuff that I want to share. And that's what brings me to speak to you wonderful ladies.
What a way to really get us started in this conversation. And I'm sure we will touch a lot more on this peeling of an onion, kind of unveiling the mask and looking and revisiting who you are. But if we can, I would love to go to earlier days when you started the first, change, transformation of being in this difficult situation, broken, struggling, just going on with life, and then had this opportunity, to get clean and fix your life and start a new path. It sounded all, easy peasy, done that, been there, awesome. Maybe not even taking the first step can be difficult, but maintain and persevere, and when there are bad days, and keep going. I'm curious, what lessons have you learned from those moments where, yes, maybe there has been opportunity, maybe there were good circumstances allowing you to leave that life behind, make decisions to get clean. Maybe the decision to do it was easier or harder, but I can imagine then the day in, day out, staying on this new path was not easy, that there was struggle, there were moments of doubt and questioning and darkness. And I'm curious, for lots of people, we know what we should be doing, we know what is the right path, we often have the knowledge and understanding that this is healthy, this is good, this is how I want my life to be, I want to eat well, I want to exercise, I want to be a decent human being. Knowing is not half the battle. I'm always curious to know what kept you going, what lessons and tools and strategies, and how do you manage to stay on the path to be able to get to the stage of, obviously I'm successful, I've made it, I have family, I have life, I have success, overcoming those early years, this early definement, because the life that you describe, the childhood that you describe, there's lots of conditioning, there's lots of happening in the brain and body and emotions being locked in the body, aside from obviously all the circumstances pushing you then and steering you to stay on this path. So I will shut up and let you take us a little bit more on your journey of how did you manage to persevere and keep going and get out of there.
Thank you, Lenka. I mean, that's a great point, and yeah, I'm really pleased that you started there, because it's a massive challenge, and for me, when I got to that point of surrendering, I really was very unconscious, and I'd always just found a way through everything. I was like a warrior. I'd found a way through everything. And as I said, I mentioned earlier, I touched on my spirit was dying, and I had no knowledge of that. I couldn't say my spirit was dying, but, I wanted to change. I had a child on the way, and I knew that the life I was living, wouldn't serve bringing a family up, wasn't something different. The physical side of addiction, I was using heroin at the time, so I managed under my own will to stop using that. I'd substitute for something else. There was always something there. I didn't have any idea how deep this problem went for me. And eventually, I didn't mention that I'd been through jails and all of that kind of journey of just, refusing to yield to life. Just anything that come to me, I went through it, it bounced off of me. So I developed this whole set of tools of survival. And, to start with, at the beginning, what I realized was everything that I knew, I couldn't trust anymore. All my coping strategies, my mechanisms of getting through life, I knew, I didn't know what was good and what was bad about me. And I realized that by just doing some journaling work. I've done a bit of journaling work. It was in a facility, but, I then saw kind of in black and white the truth of my life, because the reality that I was living in my head was completely different. I'd created this whole reality, I'd stepped into it, I was living in it, and when I actually looked at it with a different lens, with a different perspective, it was terrifying. So that motivated me to go through the change, and the change was, putting down drugs and moving away from drugs. Really wasn't, it was challenging physically, but it really wasn't the issue. What the issue was is, how do I interface with life? I've created this whole way to interface with life. And I think that was my challenge. My deepest challenge is to just let go of that. And as a 24-year-old man, I used to wake up in those early days and just have a big ball of fear in my stomach. And I just used to open my eyes and just, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to face the day? Because I was just full of fear, But all of those mechanisms that I built to interface life, they just didn't work for me in changing. So it was an onion, and I didn't even know it was an onion, but I kind of just knew 3 things that I picked up on. I went to a 12-step fellowship at the time, Narcotics Anonymous, and they was talking this whole different language, which I didn't really understand, but I could see, I could see people that looked happy and looked well, and they was talking about a lot of different things about spirituality, higher powers, all of this stuff. And 3 things I think which I really thought I can do these 3 things was to learn some honesty, self-honesty, to learn how to be open-minded and willing. So with those 3 tools, I started off on this journey of changing. And it was about being honest enough to recognize that the things, how I got my money in the past, that wasn't going to work, that wasn't part of the life. So then I had to be willing to let go of that. So, it was not only getting these tools, it was, putting them into action, learning how to integrate the tools and just use those to move forward with. And really the first year of my sobriety, my daughter was born when I was 4 months clean. And she spent her first year in and out of hospital, a lung collapse. It was, it was horrendous. And really all I still had, the ability to go through things. I still had that part of me, that belief system, that I just had to go through things. And that belief system kind of got me through a lot of that stuff, and the learning to change was a slow process. But, it was about being consistent with using these tools to start with, looking at myself and questioning myself. And even, like the honesty, I'll give you an example of the honesty quickly. I can remember going and talking to a couple of guys in recovery, and, I told them this story that I told 100 times, and, I fully believed it, and I'd embellished it along the way. And then as I walked away, I realised that it was nonsense. It was like something I'd made up. There might have been a little bit of truth in the beginning. And then I went back to him and said, that was just a load of rubbish I just told you. It was nonsense. And just, that's coming from where I come from in the East End, and no one shows any sign of weakness, any feelings. So to step into that level of vulnerability and expose myself was like, they looked at me like I was nuts. And people don't go and do that. I just told you a load of rubbish. But it was part of that process of that honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, being willing to just, go to an edge and just, try to do something different, to act differently. My thinking was quite often repetitive. It was in these cycles, and it was difficult to get out of my own will of how I should run my life. But the evidence at that time was that, I hadn't run it very well. I was incapable of running my life. That was the truth. It was very destructive to me and everyone around me. So, I understood that, and I understood that I had a deep responsibility that no one else could do for me. That I had to engage with these new tools, these new ways to be in life, and it was terrifying. Going up to those guys and saying, "Listen," that was terrifying. That was terrifying. I never felt exposed like that before. If anyone ever come at me, I'd absolutely defend myself to the absolute nth degree. It was just changing all of that stuff. And I think that's a really valuable testament of changing anything, engaging in any different way in life is actually practicing it and learning to integrate it. That's changed for me. I can think about something, think about it, tell myself stories, and the stories come from my belief systems and conditioning. But until I actually act differently, then I'm moving forward. So that was really the piece that made me different from a lot of other people that was failing.
It's interesting you're talking about this kind of self-honesty, this really being real with ourselves and looking at, what are the truths, half-truths, what are the beliefs we have about ourselves, what are the stories we're telling. And I think for lots of people, this is something that we do struggle with. We can be on both ends of the spectrum. We can lie to ourselves that we're the best, that we're doing the best we can, we're the victim, poor little me. Or we can be so hard on ourselves. We can be like, you're the worst, you do not do well, you're ugly, you're fat, you're all those things. And yet when, I love that you mentioned journaling, or when you try to put down the facts, when you put down the reality, when you start looking at it from fine and objectivity, is it true, is it not, is it my feeling, then we start peeling these layers of the onion and start realizing, okay, what is the reality, what are the stories, what is the conditioning, because we know that we create our reality. Our brain will believe whatever we tell it to. If we repeat it long enough, frequently enough, the brain will, okay, this is the truth, you keep telling me this, you keep thinking this, you keep acting this, so this is my truth, and this is how I then am going to be prompting you, I'm going to be encouraging you, I'm going to be forcing you to think, feel, behave going forward. And I think that then it's interesting that you've already been on this journey of, self-discovery and honesty, to get out of the dark places, to get on the path, on new path. And yet then you mentioned that you build yourself up, you have achieved success, you have figured out life in a way, and then you realized again that, who am I? Why am I doing this? Whose life and by which rules am I living? So can you talk us a little bit through then this, I would say, second realization, big aha moment, big new journey starting? What was the trigger there? What was the start there? What was the journey again you took from realizing, okay, I'm no longer, struggling with life. I have life figured out. Look at me. And yet I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there in that stuff, but I'll try by saying that initially, you spoke about, not knowing how to take care of ourselves and being too hard on ourselves. And, we're speaking generally because a lot of people had that problem, but I had that problem. I was like, I thought it was, I had to figure everything out, and everything was down to me. And I had this real deep need coming from my childhood to control everything. I mean, I won't go right back to childhood, but I assume that, in my childhood where I was, the only thing that I could control was what was within me. I had no external control over, being a victim and that kind of stuff. So I built these systems, and, I think that the pivot for me of moving through all of that stuff, I was gradually peeling back layers of an onion through that, and I learned, because I lived in shadow. My whole life was really spent in shadow, and all the tools that I used were on the shadow side of myself. So I really had to start develop, compassion and just empathy and stuff like that for other people, which I did start doing, and then introduce that into my life and introduce that into my business, and and like those tools that I mentioned, just started using this stuff and putting it out. And it's funny that you say, we don't know how to really be kind to ourselves and find a balance on that, even when we're moving forward. And I'll speak for me because I can't speak for anyone else, but I was 24 years into my recovery. I've become that successful person that I spoke to, and I was taking care of everyone. I was taking care of everything. My two elder children had moved out by then. I put them in flats that I'd owned because I got into property, and I was like a real entrepreneur. And I was taking care of everybody and all the staff, treating all the staff as I'd like to be treated myself, as an equal. whether they was working as a cleaner for 2 hours a day, or whether they was a manager, or running like an office refurb or something like that. I treated everyone as an equal, and I learned to do all that to other people, but I couldn't do it to myself. I went through a process during my recovery, a men's process, of making a list of everyone I could think about that I'd harmed or done some harm to. And there were so many people that I'd never be able to make an amends. And so I went through this list and wrote this whole list and it went right back to childhood, to someone that I'd upset at school just for a bit of kudos or something like that. A real in-depth look at myself. And it's interesting that I was never on that list. I never put myself on that list that I needed to amend myself. So it showed you then 24 years into recovery, into, living this life. I didn't know how to look after myself. And I think that was what was missing for me. The relationship I was in, 26 years, we've been married. It hadn't been working for quite a while, but, I had a belief system that I had to keep everything together. I come from a place of maternal abandonment. My dad wasn't really there. So, I had this deep belief system that, that doesn't matter what, I'll keep all this together. This is I'm going to do something different in what I experience. But in that belief system, there was no room for recognizing my needs in there. And what happened over a period of time was, I realized that my marriage was, as much as I tried and we tried to resolve things, it was just like I was pouring everything into just an abyss, really, and nothing was coming back. And I was so used to in life of being that self-contained and just not needing anyone or anything, so I had that in my core. And I just started to recognize, about me. That voice started coming in. He looks after me, I'm looking after all of these people. And and it was a real moment of wow, he looks after me, And of course there was no one to look after me because I didn't even know who I was. I just created these roles. So the pivot for me was one day it wasn't preemptive. It wasn't. I woke up one morning in this beautiful house that I lived in, and went out, done some gardening, and took my wife up a cup of tea. And was sitting there. It was a beautiful day. I was looking over the sea, from the balcony, and I just these words come out. I just said, "It's beautiful out there, isn't it?" And she went, "Yeah, it is. I'm not going to be here." That's my sensitivity. It's something that I've had to go back and claim. And it's still a sensitive moment for me because it was the hardest choice that I'd ever made in my life. To let go of that. But the hardest choice for me, and I just said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be here to enjoy this with you. And I walked away from that life with a bag. And just went into a spiral of just, I didn't know what was happening, really. I just went on this journey of deep change. And the first thing that I felt was loss. That's what just came up then, was loss. And it was, a lifetime of loss of stuff that I'd never acknowledged, never felt, never allowed in. It was like that moment was a catalyst for this whole well of feelings to come up, and I quickly shut it off because I was, I didn't know how to be with any of that stuff. And I realized that I was in trouble as well, because with that loss, what came up with that loss was the self-destructive element that I'd kind of put to bed, really, because I was in this safe bubble of how I was living, and but that self-destruction come up as well. And I started being in my place. I moved into a little place and trying to do some writing, trying to figure out what's going on, figure out what these feelings are. And then the knives would be singing at me, the carving knife would be singing to me like a siren, And it was like I was recognizing that, wow, I've got this real need to change this somehow. I knew that drinking drugs wasn't going to be an option. You know, I'd been clean for so long that I knew that wasn't going to be an option for me. But I just didn't know how to feel. You know, I had to learn how to feel and to connect with my feelings. So that was the big pivot for me. And once I'd kind of done that, I could have very easily gone back, because my wife was like, yeah, you know, come back. You've gone mad. You're having a crisis. And I was having a crisis. But the crisis wasn't that, you know, it was a crisis of like, who I've come into this life. I've lived, you know, by that time I was 48 years old. I've lived 48 years of it, and I don't even know who I am. That was the crisis. So, you know, I had to learn how to start feeling, and it came in tiny increments, because that's all I could manage. And I'd start feeling, maybe I'd be journaling, and all of a sudden this feeling would come up, this loss. And then it would be like an iron shutter just come down, bang, disappear, like a magician's trick. And I'd just be left like, what is going on? You know, so I went and got a bit of therapy, and you know, this guy basically just kind of held my hand and just tried to keep me safe from all this stuff, because I did feel suicidal for that period. And yeah, it was a really challenging, really difficult period of really discovering who I was and allowing all this stuff. You know, today I'm happy to show my sensitivity. I'm happy to be vulnerable. You know, these are things that I've worked really hard to reclaim in my life. To reclaim that part of me and integrate them, you know, into who I am. And I'm a warrior still. I am a warrior. I'll always be a warrior. You know, I haven't lost that part. But it's just like integrating these two energies, you know, this masculine and feminine, if you like, this vulnerability, this sensitivity, this ability to just be me, and to know that I'm a warrior and I'm strong, and, you know, I still haven't lost all of that stuff. I've just rebalanced it. So it's like, you know, the whole piece of this kind of work that I've been doing for the last 13 years now, getting into 14 years since that day, has been just integrating and finding, you know, bits of me that don't work and don't serve me. And when I say bits of me, I'm talking about belief systems. I'm talking about all this kind of stuff that you mentioned, Lenka. And yeah, it's so freeing and rewarding. It's opened up so much in my life.
Thank you for sharing that, and it's actually really lovely to have a guy showing vulnerability and showing sensitivity, because this is something that's not necessarily possible because of the society that you brought up in. You know, it's suck it up, buttercup, you're a man, men don't show feelings, you've got to be strong, you know, all these limiting ideas that are put on men, and how you should behave in society, and showing vulnerability is a weakness, and you can't be seen as weak. You know, you've got to be strong. And so thank you for really sharing that. And we've had a conversation with a gentleman who runs men's talking groups to help men in situations, and it's obviously Lenka and I come from a female's perspective, so it's just really nice to have a guy or a bloke, and I'm using these words consciously, because it is so powerful, especially for our male listeners. It is okay to it's not a weakness, but to show vulnerability and sensitivity, because it doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you, I think, more of a man, because you putting these two sides together, as you mentioned, the feminine and the masculine, the warrior, the connecting with the warrior side, or connecting your warrior side with your sensitivity and vulnerability, and they can connect. You don't need to keep them separate or suppress part of you who is sensitive, because you are human. So thank you very much for sharing that and allowing our listeners and our viewers to see and hear you speaking it and living through it. just through this conversation. So we really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability, I'm going to say, because it's a really powerful tool. And we've had another guest say vulnerability is actually a superpower. So thank you so much for that. But one thing I would like to know is, you know, you were in this place and you did mention therapy. You did mention that you've had somebody hold your hand, hold you, and help to keep you safe in, you know, through that transition that you were going through, and through that loss, and just trying to find yourself. But Lenka and I know that we don't always do these journeys on our own. We don't always find the right tools on our own. So I would love to know what has helped you, or who has helped you. Have you had, I don't know, mentors or guides, or is there books that you've been drawn to that have helped you to find it? Because we don't always know what we need in a situation. And I appreciate it might not have been in the darkest times, but as you've progressed, you said this journey has been now, 14 years. Who or what has helped you to keep going, to find your strengths, to help you to really reconnect with who you are, the masculine and the feminine, but really to help you to get to where you are right now? And just for our listeners and for myself, so that just to possibly give them an idea of what you used or who helped you, because we don't do these journeys on our own. We have help. And it's not always just a coach or somebody helping us. Sometimes it can be a podcast. Sometimes it can be an author. Sometimes it can be a forest, but we'd love to know who or what has helped you through the years, over the last 14 years.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a real challenging journey, and I had some therapy at that time, which lasted just about a year, and then I realised that I was kind of at a point that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet and start living, this new truth, and to be honest, I've been in NA and AA for getting on for like 38 years now, so I use those rooms, that 12-step foundation. I use that as a foundation, and there's a lot of spiritual values underneath for me that I see under that foundation, and I've integrated all of those tools. So they was really my tools, and on top of that, I've kind of my spirit's woken up really, and this is what has moved me through this journey. And this is what moves me through this journey and carries on to do that. And I read a book called The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success from Deepak Chopra many years ago. It's just kind of, something lit up for me with that. So I've read some Deepak Chopra stuff. I haven't really, I'm in a men's circle now, Men of Earth, I've been in it for just over a year. It's a really beautiful space where men are doing really positive healing work. And, and that's something I've stepped into recently. Apart from that, I haven't accessed any other areas really, other than using, this light that I found within me to just understand that, certain things don't serve me. And I've done a lot of, we spoke a lot about conditioning and beliefs, and I've done a lot of, really looking at my beliefs and the limiting beliefs that I've got, and then looking where do they come from, following them back to their source, reprogramming those beliefs. So that's the last couple of years as well. Apart from that, I'm a pretty social person. I've got some real good friends who men as well, who are doing this type of work, long term in recovery. So I have that I've always had that support network. If I can, speak honestly to people that come from where I come from. I know these people have been in jail, they're tough men, people that no one would mess about with, and these men are on this journey as well, of finding their truth, finding their deeper truth, and then integrating it. And for me, yeah, I've had a lot of support, and I've been courageous as well in my journey, because I go into like the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, and I share my truth. So if I'm struggling with a relationship, and I had done, especially at that time, I had abandonment wounds coming up, and I just didn't know what was going on. I was getting literally pulled all over the place by this stuff. But I just go in and I just share my truth. So I had like a support network, although a lot of people at the time would come up to me and go, "I don't know what you're talking about, mate, but I think it's going to be okay." So I just, I had that just, yeah. But I think there's a lot of stuff out there, and part of the work that you getting back to winding right back to what gets me up in the morning. Part of the work that I'm doing at the moment, I wrote a book which is a memoir, so it goes through that whole journey of being that child, going through the trajectory of my life. The real kind of fast moving stuff that I spoke about earlier, and then changing and then going into the business and learning all of that, and then needing to go right back to the beginning and find, the parts of me that I left. So I've kind of done that. I put that out there as a piece of work, which I think is a great resource to people, anyone on any journey of change, really. And also I'm doing a film at the moment. So there's another area I'm just stepping into. I'm writing a screenplay and speaking to parts of my life. So there's a part of childhood that I've taken a scene or two or three scenes, put them together, and just demonstrated like the process of what happens inside when a child is abandoned. Is like he's got no nurturing, he's got to face life. So I've tried to bring that to life so people can actually see it and maybe relate to themselves. And then I'm going to step in as a narrator and just speak to a few little bits, then move on to another part of my life and then the successful part. So I want to do that as a project I'm working on. And also I want to put some, I will do, but I haven't done them yet. I'm going to design some courses, just kind of condense down all this learning, this knowledge, and collaborate with some other people who've got some other tools. But recently, I've been doing breath work. I found that really helpful. That's really lifted another veil off of my experience of the journey through this life, and without getting all kind of woo-woo, I've discovered that actually once I've moved and healed a lot of this pain and this trauma from this life, there's an expansion into a lot of other stuff, and that fuels me. That's what keeps me going, and I think that that's what was meant to come out of all of this. I kind of look at my life and I think, well, I went through a lot and I changed a lot and I've achieved a lot, but it wasn't just so I can have a lot. It was so I can actually, take account of what is this life about? What was I doing there out in society? Just externally validating myself. Trying to get ahead, trying to win a rigged game with them, and I think the game is rigged for a lot of people. But it's just So I want to bring some tools that I have access. I've not done all this on my own. I've accessed support from other people all along the way, but I can't say I've been to this particular method or this method or, because in truth I haven't. I've just actually seen what wasn't working and moved it aside. And then when it falls back into place, I've moved it aside and just integrated, how to get back to that vulnerability, how to get back to the sensitivity and be okay with it, to tell my partner that I love her, and I can cry because my heart opens, and it's beautiful. Or I can support a friend, and I can feel lost. A few months ago I lost a friend, and I felt just such overwhelming love within a couple of days of each other. And it's just so beautiful to acknowledge these things. And it was like I used to label one as good and one as bad. And now I just label that this is life experience, experience in life. And it was never meant to be all that side. It was never meant to be all that, There's got to be like shadow. There's got to be some other stuff there. And I suppose, getting back to the stuff that men struggle with, really, I think it's, it's permission. We're conditioned. I was conditioned. I see a lot of men very, very conditioned by all sorts of stuff, by society, by their belief systems, by what's been passed down to them historically, and from ancestors and society and the patriarchal system that we're all in, all of that stuff. So for men to really get out of that, I know there's a lot of men that want to, and I see the men in my circle, do some great work. And I think it just, maybe people like me just talking to this stuff, from a place of integrity and honesty and strength is just a good a message as anything. But, I think there's loads of different modalities that I'm kind of learning about as I go along, and I think, wow, this is amazing. Authentic, is it AR, authentic relating. We had a guest speaker on our call the other night, and I thought, oh, that was brilliant. And there's other people over this side doing this stuff, and everybody's kind of doing stuff. And what I find out of all of this work, it's all great and it's all valid. It gives access to people, but what I find, it all leads back down to the same place. It all leads back down to like a place of actually, what I was missing was this connection with myself. This deep connection with me. And when I managed to connect with me, it just opened everything up. I feel like just incredible empathy and love for people. And, I've still got my sixth sense from the flats as well. So if something's happening offside, that I notice it, I'm there, I'm on it. So I've got all of this different operating systems going on. And, I've kind of got myself out of the way, and I know it's a bit of a cliche these days, but I've moved out of my own way and opened myself to this energy, whatever it is. There's so many different labels for it, and everyone's entitled to their own perception of whatever that stuff is. But yeah, and I'm not going to name it because I think it limits people. People just come with their own preconceptions of what I'm talking about. And this energy for me is that's what's empowering me. That's what's motivating me. I've connected to that truth, and I could never get to it because I was just so shut down and so conditioned by life and my ideas and my beliefs. And it's just really been so. Yeah, a lot of the work's been just moving all of that stuff out of that and opening up to something really beautiful. Yeah, I wouldn't change any of it.
Wow. And we always love a bit of woo-woo. So, it's woo-woo's good. And you really describe the journey well, because it is about seeing different things. And I think more opportunities for help is available as well through, internet, through Zoom calls, through people talking about it more. But not everything works for everybody, which is great. It's like you said, you find something, you try it, put it aside, or you keep it going. And breath work is something that we've really we've had a couple of guests talking about breath work. So that's a really powerful tool. So thank you for sharing that. And this sounds like you've got a lot of really great plans, podcast, film, creating a film, a screenplay, courses, and we are so excited to see where you're going to be going in the near future, far future, whatever it is. But it's really lovely to hear your dreams and goals, I guess, but to hear your plans or what are you wanting to move forward, because where you started, let's say, 24 and under, I gather you never, ever, ever dreamt that you would be where you are now. And there was such a possibility that, you might not even be around. I mean, running around with Lebanese gangsters dealing drugs is not a long-term life solution. It's normally has a fairly short life span. It just shows that it doesn't matter where you come from. you can go anywhere that you want, in a way. You've had 2 huge life pivotal moments, to use your word, but it just shows that don't give up, because you never know where you're going to end up. But yes, you do have to put the work in, whether it's physically dealing with an addiction, but it's also maybe walking away from a life that you're going to. And gangsters and drug dealers is not a life that's easy to walk away from. It's one thing not getting on with your family and friends and saying, well, I'm off. But I think it's going on Hollywood movies and news and people I've come across. It's not an easy life to walk away from, because they don't allow you to necessarily walk away from it. So it just shows that it doesn't matter where you are in life. You can shift it around. Doesn't mean that it's easy to do it, but it's possible. And I think possibility is very powerful, and that you realized that you were not in a good place, and realized and started to take the steps. And then again, in your 40s, having that realization again, okay, I'm not in the right place. And it also shows that it's never too late to start. Doesn't matter how old you are or where you are right now, there is possibility for change. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us, because sometimes we can get stuck in the idea that this is where I'm at and I can't change, or it's not possible to change. It's too complicated, whatever reasoning you want to put, or maybe I'm too comfortable financially, whatever. But you've proven that change is possible. Yes, it requires work. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's doable, and the possibility is there. So thank you so much for really sharing that and being so open and honest with us, because we are about having more life in one's life. And this is the journey you're on, is having more life in your life and finding that balance within yourself. And as you said, is connecting to that energy and finding that energy within you and within the outside of you as well, and connecting with the right people and the men's circles, and writing your book and your podcast and screenplays. This is all part of your journey, all part of who you are now and who you're becoming. So it's really wonderful that you've shared all of that with us, and we really appreciate it. So Steven, this is where we ask you for your gold nugget, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you touched on it in your summary about just the possibility of change. I think it's so valuable. Yeah, I quite often recognise that the person I was yesterday, I've let go of, in a different version today. So, yeah, never. My kind of philosophy is never limit myself, and just be really open to leaps of faith, because that's what I've done in the past. Big leaps of faith, and today I recognise these opportunities presenting themselves, and I never saw them before because I was very blinkered, and I wasn't very conscious. I was very focused on where I wanted to go and how I wanted to do it, and I was very good at it. But I didn't have a level of consciousness to actually look at the bigger picture. And that was why I wrote the book, and because I thought, it terrified me and fascinated me that I'd got to that point in my life, and I could have very easily just carried on that trajectory to the end of my life, earning more money, creating more wealth, whatever it was. I could have carried on that trajectory, and lots of people do. And I would have missed the trick. I would have missed the trick. And the trick is that actually, life's not really all about that. For me, life was about discovery. It was about, having the honesty, courage, and open-mindedness to really discover who I am, and really then to align to my authenticity. And that would be my my nugget for anyone, just find your authenticity. It doesn't matter. You don't have to, whatever you're doing, whatever life you're living, it doesn't matter. But, don't live it as a version of yourself that you might have created to cope, Find those threads and undo them. And, and it is hard work, as you said, but find those threads, because it's, for me, I believe that the version of me who I am now is like, that's a true version, and I can look back with hindsight and see that, I was the other versions, but there was versions that I'd created, to survive, to fit in, to cope, really. And I think, the true version, the sensitive version, I always was, I buried a pet mouse when I was a kid in Charlotte's Church. But, the kid who was wearing the flats and it become that villain, that, there was none of that left. So it's easy, I think, to train ourselves out of our true nature, out of our true authenticity, and to just to interface with life and sacrifice ourselves. And, I'd say to people, just find your integrity. That's my habit. It's hard work, but when you find it, it's the most valuable thing that you can carry in this life, and it's the greatest gift that you can give anybody else, I think. So I'll leave it there, yeah.
Thank you. And that is a really worthwhile, valuable gold nugget. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Now, for our listeners and our viewers, and they've listening to this conversation and you've hit a nerve or something has triggered them to think, oh, wow, I need to speak to Steven, or I know a friend who needs to reach out to Steven, or they just want to learn more about what it is that you're doing, your podcast or your film that you're going to be creating, or they just want to connect with you, where can people find you?
Well, I'm available on social media, and my name on there is Cockney Prophet, and that's like not profit as in money profit, Cockney Prophet, the other prophet. And I've got YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I think it's Facebook. So I'm there. My book is called Lost in the Babylon, and that's available on Amazon. Steven Rosen. The film, if anyone is interested in that, just follow me on social media and get tagged on that. My podcast is called The Cockney Guide to Enlightenment, and that's a really interesting podcast. I speak to people like myself and people like you guys, and just about the journey through life, and not necessarily what you've achieved, but how you got there. The ups and downs, the adversity, the tools that similar similar style podcast to this one. So that's out on all platforms, and we're starting to put it on YouTube as well. So there's some episodes out on my Copy Prophet YouTube channel. And please, just reach out to me, and just message me, direct message me, connect with me. I'm all about just carrying this stuff and sharing it, and making it accessible. I think that's my that's where I see myself. I'm not turning into some whatever it is. I'm just me, and I've got this experience, and I'm happy to try and help people steer them in the right direction if I can.
Well, we'll make sure that all the links are in the description below and people can go and check you out. And as you were speaking, I realized that's how I've actually stumbled across you and your work and your journey. Is one of your guests on the podcast, Rosemary Cunningham, shared your podcast on her social media. And I know Rosemary for years, and we had her on our podcast as well. And something in her post was like, oh, intriguing, interesting, let me find out more about this fella, this podcast. And I was like, oh, interesting, we have to have you on our podcast as well. So small world. I love the dots of connecting through wonderful people we know to more wonderful people and sharing stories. And one thing that we are all about on this podcast is to finding ways to have more life in your life. and leaning more in life. And I think your journey is a beautiful example of how again and again you were finding ways to find yourself and your way of living and leaning more into your true and honest and genuine authentic life. And I'm curious right now, what gives you life?
What gives me life? Yeah, it's a really interesting and deep question. I think love. I think love really lights me up, and being able to love without attachment, without risk. Just, even if it doesn't come back, just to love. It's just such a beautiful energy. And I know, I just know there are a lot of experiences I've not shared in this podcast, but I'm still processing a lot of that stuff. I'm just on a journey here, and I've realised that it's not about achieving. It's not about it's about being. It's just about being, and that's what gives me life. That's what gives me the energy. Just tapping into that, knowing that I'm right where I'm meant to be. And I find that through this journey, you spoke about connections, and I find people like yourselves, we're attracted to each other. We come across each other and see the opportunities of collaborating and sharing. Yeah, so all of that stuff really lights me up. It really lights me up. I don't want to give a false impression. Life can be challenging. My daughter's just going through some stuff that's very difficult, but I'm not in fear. I'm not in. I know that I'm equipped as a human being, as a dad, as the best version of my soul that I can deliver it in this life, to meet whatever comes in there. So yeah, that's a beautiful connection to have, and it really gives me the depth and the value of life, and an understanding that this is much more than any one thing I can do or achieve. So, and to share it is beautiful. That's the goal, really, just to share that. Thanks. What a lovely question.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Snippets of your story, because obviously 40 plus years is a long time, but you've really shared with us your humanness and your experiences and what you've gone through. So we really appreciate that. We really appreciate your time and your vulnerability. So thank you so much for being with us here today. And for our listeners, what have you got from today? What aha moments? What has been triggered as well? What has inspired you from this conversation? Because even though there were sort of dark elements in the conversation, it's still a very inspiring conversation. So we would love to know your thoughts, and we would love to know if you've been in a place where you've thought, oh, I don't know how I'm going to carry on, and what kept you going, what's guided you, what's helped you. We would love to know your thoughts, and especially what is giving you life at the moment and what inspires you at the moment. And until next time, talk to you soon. Bye.